Joining us now, a public affairs analyst who will, throw more light on how Nigeria can achieve its financial inclusion target. I'm joined now by a public affairs analyst, Faiz Aliyu. Thank you, Mr. Faiz, for coming on Business Daily today.
Thank you for having me.
I will start off with, the initiative that has been introduced by the government, talking about the projection of, growing the Nigeria's financial inclusion bracket and achieving a $1 trillion economy by the year 2030. Very, big goals and aspirations there by our federal government.
Certainly.
But let us hear from you. Are those targets feasible? And aside from that, what specific things would you say need to be put in place to ensure that those targets are indeed achievable by, I believe, the next 6 years?
Yes, well, increasing the size of the economy to $1 trillion isn't going to be something we achieve simply through financial inclusion, but it will make it easier for us to have a more expanded base through which the economy will grow if we can put more people into the financial inclusion index. So far, compared to the rest of sub-Saharan Africa, Nigeria has, I think, only an 8% gap when it comes to gender inclusion, for example, versus the 12% gap that you see in the rest of the continent. And we have increased financial inclusion by nearly 70% for the country, or was it 69% really, over the past decade. Financial inclusion is a measure that the government has been trying to increase, has been putting through different programs in order to expand, but we really did not focus on it too greatly until the late 2010s. Currently, we're in a situation where we have the northern region of the country is really the area of the country that has less financial inclusion. That has to do with a great majority of it being in rural areas where there isn't as much infrastructure from the banking sector. It also has to do with challenges that we have with security. Financial inclusion is a measure that is only about 10 years old in Nigeria, and unfortunately the past 10 years have also been largely insecure in that particular region. So within the Northwest, you have something like only 47% having bank accounts and using financial inclusion tools. And within the Northeast, I believe it's only 38%. So this is really where the government needs to focus on. There are several reasons why this is the case. Some of it has to do with cultural and religious factors. Several people within the northern region are reticent to join the banking sector simply because they believe it is interest compliant, which goes against Islamic principles in the north. Other issues simply has to do with the simple size of the issue. When you look at, for example, Kano, Kaduna, and Borno states, between the three of them, you're looking at something between 26 and 27 million people. So the cost of initiating the program and ensuring that as many people as possible are included in the financial inclusion index is an endeavor that will take a lot of resources. Therefore, it takes time in order to come to its obvious conclusion.
Well said there, Mr. Faiz Aliyu, who is a public affairs analyst. But we will still, have more coming. But let's go on a short break. When we return, the conversation continues. Do stay. And you're still watching Business Daily, coming to you live on Trust TV. Just before the break, we started a conversation on the new initiative launched by the president, by the federal government, where, there is the target of growing the Nigerian economy to a $1 trillion economy by the year 2030. And according to the vice president, this is expected, this is one of the ways that these will be achievable is through, increasing the financial inclusion bracket here in Nigeria. But I still have my guest, who is a public affairs analyst, Faiz Muhammad Aliyu. Thank you again for coming on Business Daily. Okay, just before we went on the break, you emphasized that indeed Nigeria has made some gains in the past, but the challenges still persist. You talked to issues around gender and culture, religion. But I would like for us to emphasize more on, the progress that we've made so far. What specific areas would you say Nigeria has made progress in the area of financial inclusion?
Well, I think Nigeria has really made significant progress, especially when it comes to mobile money. Most of the progress that we've been able to make has been through the introduction of technological innovations, such as smartphones that bring with them easier financial inclusion measures, whether that be through mobile phone apps or mobile money. It also has given us the opportunity to bring non-traditional banking actors, such as MoneyPoint or Paga, which help traditionally non-financially inclined actors come into the market. So you find people within the rural areas who are much more inclined to be able to sign up for these sort of mobile money markets rather than go to traditional banking, which isn't much, is either very difficult for them to access, either because of the distance, or sometimes it's simply not within their financial capacity to be able to maintain.
When you said what you said, what crossed my mind now was the policy and regulation aspect. Over time, we've also seen improvement in that area,
Certainly.
talking about, the acts such as the Startup Act and some other acts that have been put into place. But I would like for us to, touch briefly on the newly launched initiative. And I believe there is also an ASO Accord on economic and financial inclusion. What specific measures would you advise the government at this point to take to ensure that these targets are indeed met in the next 6 years?
I think one of the easiest ways in which that we can increase the financial inclusion base is to focus on the introduction of mobile money specifically. That is being able to make payments directly through your mobile phone, not through applications, but through your specific number. Now, this is something that is very common within the rest of West Africa and has a very large customer base in countries such as Kenya and South Africa. Now, what you notice in those countries is that 100%, in the example of South Africa, for example, 100% of the people who have financial accounts, who have banking records, also have mobile money accounts. So it's something that's very easy for them to get into. It also makes it much easier for people who already have a mobile phone, whether that is a smartphone or simply a feature phone, to be able to access financial services without the added burden of having to have data or having to have internet services nearby their particular areas. That'll be something that can speed up the introduction of financial inclusion, especially to rural areas of Nigeria, where most of the financial inclusion needs to be focused on. Specifically also, focus needs to be had on closing the gender gap. You have a situation where in different parts of the country, you see a gap of anywhere between 8 and 12% between the number of women and the number of men who have access to financial inclusion strategies. Now, some of that has to do with a lack of education, simply a lack of information, actually. People don't know that they have as many options as they actually do. People are stopped by a language barrier in which these services are available to them, but they haven't been explained in a way that they'll be able to understand. And so that keeps them away from services that would be able to help them continue their businesses, help them access loans, help them access credit facilities, which will help them grow businesses in their particular constituents.
You talked about, doing banking services without necessarily having data on your phone. Yes. But what crossed my mind now is, don't we already have that, talking about the short codes that, some banks have introduced? use. Is that what you're referring to?
USSD codes, you mean?
Yes, USSD
yes, we
codes.
do have that, but those have very limited. Applications actually, and in reality, all of those come from traditional banks. And you see, the issue with traditional banks is they aren't anywhere near rural areas where the majority of people who are unbanked already live. So in order to make it easier for them, you have to create a situation whereby mobile money is accessible to them without actually having to go to a bank.
Interesting. The Vice President also did emphasize the need for, stakeholder collaboration towards achieving these very, big goals that the federal government has set up for. And what crosses my mind now is, what sort of stakeholder collaboration would you, are you expecting to see moving forward?
I think one of the easiest ways to really push forward a financial inclusion strategy is to involve players that are already in the technological space in Nigeria. When you look at various innovation hubs, you look at community leaders, you look at development partners. These are people that already have access, already have data, already have the know-how of how to reach people who are in rural areas. These are the people who are already serving as their customer base. And so if the government were able to bring them in as part of the strategy to be able to bring in these particular customers into the financial inclusion index, it would make the job much easier. So if you could have programs, either whether those are training programs, whether those are knowledge mobilization programs, regarding the use of financial services, regarding the ease of their access, regarding their applications for business to rural areas of Nigeria specifically, but also to the larger population, in collaboration with tech and innovation hubs, in collaboration with international development partners and NGOs and community leaders, whether that is traditional leaders or local government actors. It would speed up the financial inclusion index very swiftly.
What about private sector collaboration? Because over time we've seen, the private sector emerge as one of the major contributors to the Nigeria's GDP. So are you looking towards seeing that play out as well?
Certainly, private sector influence is integral to it. However, I would argue that the private sector is already heavily invested in the financial inclusion strategies that the government set forth years ago. Currently, the issue is that these private sector actors, who are mostly traditional banks, do not have either the infrastructure within rural areas to be able to reach these people, or reaching those people is not exactly cost effective enough for them to make the investment. And so they're already part of it. What there needs to be is a middle actor, which is why I stress the importance of community leaders and innovation centers to be able to bridge the gap between the public sector and the private sector.
You also did talk about technology playing a role in all of this.
Certainly.
And what I am thinking of now is how much we need in the area of, do I say technological advancement now, no integration, talking about internet penetration, because in most cases, as we speak, you need internet to engage in banking transactions wherever you are. So how would you say, or where would you say Nigeria currently is in that area, especially talking about internet penetration, access to gadgets and all of that? How far have we come in that area?
We've come very far, especially within the last 10 years. We have something as, I think, 138 million of the population has smartphones. And almost all of those are accessing financial services. You compare this with where we were simply 10 years ago, where we had, I think, about 70 million, or no, 66 million around 2014. That had access to financial services through mobile money. So I think we've come a significant way. And with regards to internet penetration, I think the infrastructure has also improved, but that improvement has centered around urban areas in Nigeria. And rural areas, where again, the vast majority of people who are unbanked really live, has not seen the same level of investment, for a good reason. The return on investment is particularly low in those areas, which is why strategies need to be developed that don't necessarily include heavy investment in internet infrastructure in the rural area in order to get people financially included.
What are the metrics that will be used, say, in the next 6 years to measure the success of this initiative? What should we look out for?
I think if you can see an increase in entrepreneurship and small and medium businesses that have access to financial inclusion, that are accessing loans, that are accessing credit facilities, that are accessing everything from mobile money to insurance schemes, that's definitely a very good indicator that the scheme is working. You would also see a decrease in the gap between female and male inclusion within the financial sector. I think it's also important to look at the metrics regarding mobile money and mobile penetration. Like I said before, when you look at the rest of Africa, the rest of sub-Saharan Africa, the way they've been able to solve this is to ensure that mobile money, along with mobile applications, are options that the general public has in order to access financial inclusion strategies. And if we can really bridge that gap, then I think it would speed up the process significantly.
When you say the rest of Africa, which countries specifically are you referring to?
Specifically, you look at South Africa, where you have something like 71% of the population being financially included. But then you also see that even those who aren't financially included are using mobile money. And then of the ones who are financially included, that 71%, 100% of them are also using mobile money. So that means that there is a gap there. There is a gap that can be bridged there. The same is true in a country like Kenya. The same is true in even smaller countries such as Senegal, where mobile money has increased both internet penetration and financial inclusion by 38% within the last 6 years alone.
Interesting data right there. I would like for us to touch on, poverty alleviation, because the Vice President did emphasize on how, financial inclusion will help to contribute, in the area of poverty alleviation.
Yes.
But let us hear from you now. How does financial inclusion in the long term, impact on the reduction of poverty in, poverty-stricken areas?
Okay. So you see, when it comes to poverty alleviation schemes, several government measures can be used in order to either allay poverty or prevent it. However, the one measure that is most effective is commercialization. How do you get people who have small businesses, nano businesses, micro businesses, to be able to use those businesses to increase their economic base? Now, if you have an access to loan facilities, you have access to credit facilities, which is how the majority of businesses really find ways in which to raise capital, then that means that you have a way in which to already increase the size of your business and grow your business over a slow and significant period of time. Yes. Now, without financial services, it becomes a much more difficult endeavor, because really in the developing world, there has not been a case whereby entrepreneurs and small businesses and medium enterprises have grown without access to these credit facilities. So the more you're able to include people in these sort of schemes, the more their businesses grow, the more communities are able to create jobs, and the more people are financially included. Certainly also, financial inclusion means that the more people have access to banking services, the more they'll be spending. And the more they're spending, the more the economy is growing. So the more people that are included in the financial index, the larger Nigeria's economy grows.
Well said. But I would like for us to talk to issues around the right policies being put in place to ensure that this indeed does happen.
Right.
Talking about the policy direction moving forward, you've emphasized on challenges such as access to finance, access to credit. But then again, this cannot, be possible without the right policies in place.
That's
and
true.
sometimes we have very good policy documents, but not so much is done in the area of implementation.
That's true.
So I would like for you to, talk to issues around policy and policy direction. Are there any specific areas that you will recommend that, some sort of policy is put in place to ensure that Nigeria indeed, has access to, or is financially included, like is expected by the year 2030?
Okay, so there are two things that I think need to be focused on. As I mentioned earlier, the vast majority of Nigeria's population that isn't financially included, lives in the northern part of the country. Now, the easiest way for us to overcome that issue is two ways. Number one, you have to ensure that the vast majority of banking services that are available to people in the northern region are Sharia compliant, so that you can ensure that people are more likely to take part in financial inclusion measures. Secondly, you also have to ensure that mobile money is available as an option to the majority of the population. Now, there are regulatory issues. There are certain concerns that the central bank has with regard to mobile money, and that is why its inclusion has not been as swift as it has been across the rest of West Africa. And so I think that's something that the government needs to focus on very seriously in order to ensure that this does not become a stopgap that prevents us from really bridging the gap between the included and the unincluded. I also think that the government has actually done a very good job so far as policy integration is concerned. Financial inclusion, like I said, has increased significantly over the past several years, and that is an indication of the government's efforts to see through to the policy and see through to its implementation. There are areas that need improvement. Specifically, earlier I mentioned a language barrier. I think if services are offered to people in languages that they understand, it will be easier to include them or to convince them really to join the Financial Inclusion Index. Lastly, I do think that it is important that the government also focuses on including as many demographic sectors as possible. Usually the argument is that the people who need to be included in the in the net of financial inclusion include men who are business owners or who are salary owners, who are rural farmers, because these are the people who move the economy. However, the reality of Nigeria today is that you have people who are either women in the economy, you have people who are young, you have people who are in the cities and are creating nano businesses or online businesses for themselves, all of which contribute to Nigeria's economic growth. And so it's important that as many as they as well are included in the financial inclusion net.
Okay, just before we go in 1 minute, what are your thoughts on cryptocurrency and increasing financial inclusion? I know I'm putting you on the spot, but let's hear from you.
Okay, so I think blockchain technology, which is basically a decentralized ledger through which you can have a secure payment structure, is a useful technology specifically for remittances. So if you are trying to send money out of the country or from outside the country into Nigeria, it is a very secure way of doing so. Having said that, I think the problem that we have in Nigeria, once again, is regulation. Unless we are able to regulate the cryptocurrency sector to the point where we're able to identify who the major players are, who is it that makes most of the transactions, where do most of these transactions go, then it would be very odd for the government to simply allow cryptocurrency to become a major factor of the economy without having these controls in place. I do think it would be a mistake to completely forego the use of cryptocurrency as time moves forward, because it is a technology that's not going anywhere. It might be new, it might be untested in some areas, but it is here to stay. Therefore, it behooves the government and financial partners across the nation to really find ways in which to make it both inclusive and safe regulatorily for the country.
Well said. Interesting perspectives there by Faiz Muhammad Aliyu, who is a public affairs analyst, speaking to how Nigeria can broaden financial inclusion. Thank you very much for the insight you have shared today on Business Daily.
Thank you for having me.
Well, this is where we draw the curtains on today's edition of Business Daily. But join the conversation on social media and let us hear from you. My name is Chiamaka Enendu. Thank you for watching, and bye for now.